Okay, let's dive right into this. Welcome to today's Explainer. Today, we're untangling what is literally one of the most complex, staggering financial puzzles sitting in the Texas federal courts right now. We're looking at the Securities and Exchange Commission's massive case against Texas real estate developer Timothy Barton. And honestly, this isn't just a story about real estate. It's this wild, twisting maze of forensic accounting, intense legal battles, and, as the title says, missing millions. So let's just get straight to the numbers that make this case so extraordinary.
$26 million. To put that in perspective, according to the SEC, that is the staggering amount of money poured into these unregistered securities offerings by over 100 different investors. We're talking about everyday people here, primarily Chinese nationals who were just looking for a safe, lucrative place to park their capital, you know? They firmly believed they were funding specific, highly secure real estate developments in Texas. But, well, as the court documents allege, the reality of where that $26 million actually went is a very, very different story.
Instead of buying land and pouring concrete, the SEC claims Barton misappropriated the vast majority of these funds to finance an absolutely lavish lifestyle. I mean, we're talking about buying a private plane, paying off personal credit card bills, his rent, funneling money to his ex-wife and kids. The SEC also alleges that these funds were used to pay totally undisclosed, unauthorized commissions to his partners, to make unrelated political contributions, and, maybe the biggest red flag of the whole shebang, making Ponzi-style payments to earlier investors just to keep the whole illusion afloat.
Section 1. The Texas Real Estate Pitch. A house of cards?
So you have to ask yourself, how do you convince over 100 people to hand over $26 million? And this brilliantly illustrates the pitch versus the reality. The pitch to these Chinese investors was super attractive. Provide a loan for Texas real estate development, and in return, get a guaranteed 10% fixed interest rate plus your principal back in 2 years. They were literally told their investments were fully guaranteed. But the reality? The SEC found that the guaranteeing company had absolutely zero assets, none. There was no safety net. The funds weren't kept in secure, property-specific accounts like they should be. Instead, they were heavily commingled, basically passed around to plug holes in this pervasive alleged fraud.
Now, to pull off a pitch like this, you need a crew, right? The SEC identified 3 main architects. First, you have Timothy Barton, the Texas real estate developer at the dead center of it all. Then you have Stephen Wall, a local home builder who supposedly partnered with Barton to, build the actual homes on the developed lots. And finally, there's Hao Kang, or Michael, Fu. Fu was the broker. He was the one out there actually securing these deals with the Chinese investors. And it's really worth noting here that while Barton is fighting these allegations tooth and nail, Fu has already waived indictment and pleaded guilty to the sale of unregistered securities.
Which brings us to Section 2, following the missing millions. So once the authorities stepped in, the real work began. And honestly, this is where the story turns into a full-blown forensic detective thriller. Usually, when you're trying to trace $26 million, you just follow the paper trail. But the SEC and the court-appointed accountants allege they hit a massive, deliberate brick wall. According to court filings, Barton allegedly changed QuickBooks login credentials specifically to lock out investigators. He migrated critical accounting data to cloud platforms the second he knew the SEC was watching. He even allegedly told his head accountant to flat-out refuse to speak to authorities. It's wild. You combine that with a strategy of funneling money through single-purpose shell entities, and you get a financial knot that is incredibly difficult to untangle.
In fact, the commingling of funds was so dense, so complicated, that it led to this striking admission in the court documents. The obstruction tactics, quote, rendered a definitive, start-to-finish tracing analysis nearly impossible for many accounts. I mean, think about that for a second. Even specialized forensic accountants, people whose entire job is to track missing money, literally threw their hands up at certain points because the web of transfers, middlemen, and commingled accounts was just too convoluted.
Section 3. Enter the receiver.
Okay, so here's the crucial question. When the money is actively vanishing and the books are closed tight, how does the justice system stop the bleeding? Well, they deploy a really powerful legal tool called a receivership. Basically, when a judge sees that a defendant might be actively draining assets, like, say, spending investor money on a private plane or their personal lawyers, they appoint an independent third party to step in as an emergency brake. This receiver seizes control of the business entities, freezes the bank accounts, and manages whatever assets are left to protect them for the actual victims.
In this specific case, the court-appointed receiver Courtney C. Thomas from the law firm Brown Fox to take control of Barton's entities. And, as you might expect, Barton did not take this quietly. At all. He fought back fiercely. He refused to turn over documents, and he even went so far as to file state bar grievances against the receiver's counsel in an attempt to stall them. The retaliation was actually so intense that the judge had to step in and legally order Barton to pre-clear any future grievances with the court, just to stop him from drowning the receivership estate in the legal cost of defending against these meritless attacks.
Section 4. The legal roadblocks. Now, while the SEC is fighting that massive civil battle, the Department of Justice also indicted Barton for wire and securities fraud, which brings us to the ultimate legal battlefield. Look at this timeline. The original criminal trial was set for May 2023. Then it was pushed to February 2024, then September, then March 2025, then October 2025. And as of the very latest court filings, it is now incredibly set for March 2026. That is nearly 3 years of delays. Through this absolutely relentless barrage of motions, appeals, and requests for continuances, the legal system has been slowed to an absolute crawl.
Now, what's really interesting about this is that despite all those endless delays, the courts are finally putting their foot down. Barton appealed the very existence of the receivership, right? He claimed the court didn't have jurisdiction and that the SEC's tracing was totally flawed. But on April 17, 2025, the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals issued this opinion, firmly affirming the receivership order. They agreed that the SEC had shown overwhelming evidence of fraud and dissipation of assets, and they completely validated the receiver's control over 50 different Barton-affiliated entities.
Section 5. Where does it end? So, a huge court win, right? Well, yes, but winning an appeal doesn't magically put money back into the pockets of the victims. And here's the tragic reality of this entire situation. While the trial gets delayed year after year, the clock just keeps ticking on the debts. There are secured lenders involved in these properties, like a group called McCormick, who's owed millions in principal. And because they're secured lenders, their debt accrues massive interest every single day this drags on. The receiver himself noted that everyone's going to point fingers at Barton for these delays, but legally the secured lenders will demand to be paid in full first, meaning they could easily eat up all the remaining assets through accrued interest before the defrauded Chinese investors see a single dime.
So we are left with this. When the dust finally settles in 2026, or honestly whenever this trial actually happens, and the secured lenders take their cut and the lawyers and receivers have been paid for years of untangling this massive mess, will there be anything left? It really highlights the ultimate tragedy of complex financial fraud. Sometimes, the grueling, delayed legal process required to find justice ends up completely consuming the very assets the victims are so desperately trying to recover. Thank you so much for joining me on this Deep Dive Explainer. I'd love to know what you think about this case, so keep learning and I'll see you next time.